Welcome to our first Q&A episode for the month of November. I'm super fired up about this one. This month, we're going to focus on leadership. And when I was thinking about leadership in business, I couldn't think of anybody better to bring on to talk about the subject than Leif Babin. Now, if you don't know who he is, he's a co-author of Extreme Ownership. He's been doing so many different things. He's a former Navy SEAL. He's a co-founder of Echelon Front that does a ton of things from a leadership perspective, in particular, in-person events like these FTX. He also goes out and talks to a lot of different companies, gives these big speeches, these huge muster events, and his exposure to different businesses, not only from the military, but now taking that and practically applying it to actual leaders is one of the biggest reasons why I wanted him to come and talk about it, because he's not just learning himself, he's out there now sharing that with all these different leaders and then learning from hundreds, if not thousands of businesses on what works for them. And hopefully it'll work for you as well. So let's start off with question number one. Leif, just super excited to have you with us. And one of the questions we had come from online, which I think is a good one, is which truly drive success? So if you had to pinpoint a singular kind of focus, is it motivation? Is it discipline? Is it your habits over time? Or is it just having clear objectives and goals? And I think that's a great place to start with this. Is like, there's a lot of things that people could focus on, but which one, if you had to nail down, would be the one that probably drives the most value?
Yeah, that's an awesome question, Jason. First of all, great to be on with you, man. I very humble to be here, and if there's anything that qualifies me to talk about leadership in any way, it's that I've made just about every mistake that you could possibly make as a leader, and had to learn from those mistakes and think deeply about them and teach the next generation of SEAL leaders not to make those same mistakes. And I get a chance to talk to leaders in just about every industry across the business world now with what we do at Echelon Front. I think the answer to your question is, what drives success, right? Is it motivation, discipline, or clear goals? I think it's discipline. I think it's 100% discipline. And the reason I say that is because if you're only going to train, right, when you're motivated, then you're probably not going to train. I mean, how often are you just, when you're waking up and you're injured, or you're tired, or you got in late the night before, it's real easy to like skip the morning workout, right? Or it's real easy to, hey, jujitsu, I kind of tweaked my elbow or my shoulder yesterday. Hey, I'm going to, sit this one out. There's plenty of times, I would say at least 50% of the time, right, where you may not be feeling motivated to actually go and do something. And I think it's, my probably best case example of that is basic SEAL training called BUDS, Basic On-War Demolition SEAL Training. I mean, I had people in my class that were professionally sponsored triathletes. We had, Marine, recon Marines that came to that training, and people that were highly qualified people, amazing athletes. And the thing about BUDS is like they're going to find that when it's 3:00 in the morning, and you're sitting out in the surf zone, jackhammering with cold, when the water's 55 degrees and you don't have a wetsuit on, and you've been out there and you've been up for 48 straight hours, and there's sand in your eyes, like no one's motivated. There's not a single person in that class that's like, I feel so motivated. I'm going to channel the inner, like Metallica song that's going to keep me going through. What's going to get you through that stuff is discipline. You're going to have to push through that stuff with discipline. And I think life is going to throw challenges at us like that. And so whether it's writing a book, and actually taking the time to put, words down on paper and edit those words, whether it's launching a business, whether it's trying to close a deal with a sale, whether it's mentoring your children, anything that you're doing in life, there's going to be challenges, that there's going to be difficulties, there's going to be obstacles that you come up against. And I think if you're relying on motivation, it's not going to get you through. You're going to have to rely on discipline to be able to push you through those times. Now, I will say that that's deeply tied to if you have some very clear goals that are set out, then I think that's going to enable you to remain focused on that goal. Hey, look, my goal is to be a SEAL, and in order to be a SEAL, I've got to make it to this program, which means that even though it's 3:00 in the morning and I'm freezing cold and this is miserable, I'm going to keep powering through this stuff. So I think if you can stay focused on the goal that you've set for yourself, then it's easier to have the discipline to make it through, because you realize where you're actually going and you don't lose sight of the fact like, oh, this is miserable. Because we had plenty of people that quit, in my class, in most of them, during Hell Week, that toughest, 5-day period that we're talking about. They lose sort of the side of the goal, and they'll say things like, well, I just, I just didn't really like it. I didn't really like it. And you're like, look, this is training. This is a screening process. This isn't what it's like in SEAL teams. Now, in combat missions, I was more sleep deprived and more physically exhausted on combat missions than I ever was in training. So it's a great training program to prepare you for the difficulties that you're going to have to face in reality on the battlefield, or might potentially have to face. But I think that when you think about and have a clear vision for the strategic goals you're trying to achieve, I think that it makes it easier to stay disciplined, to do the things that you need to do, and push through those hard times and overcome obstacles in order to be successful.
Maybe the clear goals piece is a part of the answer to this question, but I know that some people listening, or just some people out there in general, just, hey, I just don't have that. Like, I don't have the discipline the way that, hearing you talk about it do, or the way that Jason does. Like, what would you say is the way to build that or establish discipline if you're someone that feels like you've always struggled with stickiness, like you've always counted on motivation? Is it a muscle that you can build? What's kind of the advice there?
I think it absolutely is a muscle that you can build. I think it's something that it becomes, it becomes habit through practice. So I think it's a hard thing. It's something that I'm not a super disciplined person. And my business partner, Jocko, who's my boss in the SEAL teams, is probably the most disciplined person I know. But you realize, like, discipline is actually what's going to enable us to be successful. And so I think the discipline habits of starting with the small things, whether it's your alarm going off in the morning and getting out of bed, that's where things start. And I think when you understand where you're trying to go, I mean, this is, we talk about detachment, and Jason, I know you and I certainly talked a lot about this, particularly
my favorite thing. Yeah, I love it.
SEAL training exercise program, right? We're throwing you into this mock style SEAL mission, and with laser taggers, and you're trying to lead a group of people to go out and capture, kill a bad guy, or maybe even just patrol from point A to point B, with some resistance, and you've got enemy role players, as playing the part of bad guys that are shooting at you with those laser taggers. What is required in order to see what you need to actually focus on is a detachment. You got to be able to take a step back from the details. And so I think that's where that goal setting is, when you think about where you actually want to be. And then in the military, we use backwards planning for combat mission planning. So what that means is, if I'm going to launch on a capture kill raid to go out and go after a particular bad guy that's in a location, I'm going to start with where we want that mission to end up. Like, I want to be back on the camp before the sun comes up and the enemy's moving around, so that we can get in and out as fast as we can. Then I'm going to start with, okay, we're back at the base. might even build some fudge factor time in, but we're going to end at this point. And so now I'm going to backwards plan. That means that I need to hit the target at this time in order to do all my sensitive side exploitation and try to account for, any contingencies that might be there. That means we have to launch on the mission at this time, which means that then we have to finish planning the mission at this time. We have to brief the mission at this time. So you're backwards planning. And I think, goal setting is the same way. If you're thinking about where you want to be, then you can start to backwards plan and put those things on the calendar. And I think the more that you can build that in, to where you practice it in the little things. Hey, I've got this on the calendar. I'm going to focus on this long-term goal. And maybe I'm just going to do it I'm going to build, 2.5 hours a week that I'm going to dedicate to doing this thing. And I'll break that up into little 30-minute blocks when it fits into my schedule. But if you're practicing doing those things, I definitely think, to your question, Gabe, that it starts to become muscle memory, and you start to realize, and then you can see the benefits of it, right? Of discipline over time. I'm getting better. I'm making improvements. And when you can test yourself, you can see that you're actually tracking toward that goal. And if you're not tracking it, right, if you're not actually paying attention to it, then all of a sudden you just look up, a year from now and realize that you haven't moved at all toward the strategic goals that are most important.
I feel like I could talk to you about this kind of stuff for hours and hours, but because these are the short form Q&As, we're going to get into a lot of other ones over the next, this month. I did want to finish up at least my question on this side, which is the discipline side. I love the way you started with that and having the goal and what Gabe was talking about developing discipline. But my question, and this I think relates to buds really well. I'm sure you've seen a lot of guys that are physically talented, like you were talking about, who break down. And I'm curious, this like strong why or ethos and how important it is in your goal setting. Meaning, if you really want to be a Navy SEAL, but like maybe you want it just because like you want to be able to wear a trident, or like maybe you have like there's a difference between the guys who really want it and the guys who want it maybe for other reasons. I'm sure you've seen that. And maybe in business, it's the same thing. Like you say you have a goal, but do you really want that goal? Do you have a strong why for it? Like, I guess, how do you place your own perspective, like in terms of someone's deep why to goal set? Because that's ultimately what's going to help you get there. The Buds is probably a great example of that because I'm sure you've seen it.
I think Buds is an excellent example. I mean, just to put numbers on it, we started my class with 193 guys, and we graduated 44 at the end of that training. And actually, only 18 of the 44 were originals that started on day one with that 193 guys. Wow. So 18 out of 193, made it through in one shot without getting injured or roll back. For some reason or the other. So we had some rollbacks added to that 18 that gave us the total of 44, that graduated. But a lot of times when a lot of those people that quit Buds, when you ask them about it, they'll say, well, I just couldn't take the cold water, or, I wasn't a good enough runner. I didn't do enough pull-ups. And really what I tell them, Jason, is I think that actually the most important thing is that you didn't look in the mirror hard enough and say, that's what I want to do. That's what I want to do. I looked at myself in the mirror and said, this is what I want to do. I know it's going to be incredibly difficult. It's going to be harder than anything I could ever imagine, but I'm going to train and prepare for the absolute worst case scenario. And I'm going to do whatever it takes to actually make it through this program. And I'm going to overcome any challenge that they throw ahead of me. And I think with that kind of understanding of just full commitment to what you want to do despite all obstacles, that's the greatest strength of the SEAL teams. I think that's why that program works so well. And that's why we have the storied history and legacy that SEAL teams have, because SEALs have been able to do extraordinary things on the battlefield. And it all starts with the kind of person that makes it through that training program. So I think that's what I love, most about that program. But it's somebody that I think has really thought deeply about they're going to do whatever it takes to make that happen, and so I think that, that's like any goal. If you are dedicated to making that happen, no matter what, obviously there are things that are out of your control, right? You could be physically injured or something could happen, or maybe you don't qualify for the program because you didn't meet the stringent physical requirements, the Navy physical that you have to take, and maybe you had a medical condition, all those things. But I think once you're in that program, like that's what makes the difference, is somebody that's going to do anything to make it happen. The other thing that you see in this is when most of those people end up quitting in Hell Week, as we mentioned before. And, the guys that are like, I just couldn't take the cold water. If you look at somebody, you're out there locked arms in the surf zone at 3:00 in the morning, as I described earlier, you look at somebody and they have that kind of far away 1,000-yard stare. You can see that they're feeling sorry for themselves. They know that, like, oh man, I just can't take it. They might be thinking that other people just aren't suffering like them. But the reality is everybody's actually suffering. So the people, that person's eventually going to go ring the bell. Even if you try to talk them out of it, they're probably going to slip away when you're not around and go ring the bell. And I saw that happen a bunch of times. But when you look at the guy, you look at another person on the other side of you, and they look back at you with a gigantic smile, on their face, and they're like, dude, this sucks. And they're laughing about how hard it sucks, and how terrible it is. And it's hilarious to them about just how bad they're suffering. This is like exactly the kind of person that's going to do well in that training, because it's not that they're not suffering, right? It's not that they're not actually having to push through some difficult times, but they have a completely different attitude about it. They recognize how bad it is. They're willing to laugh at it, to make light of it. And that attitude, I saw that in combat in the worst situations, with bullets flying around and explosions going off, where people are laughing about how terrible that is, and making light of the situation. So I think that is a quality that I think could serve you well, is that, look, everybody's suffering, and you can control your attitude through that suffering and how you take that on. And I know for me, it took me years and years just to get a chance to actually go. I went to the Naval Academy. I got turned down for the program out of the Naval Academy. I was not selected. I put in a package 2 years into my career as a surface warfare officer on a Navy ship. I got turned down again. And so by the time I actually got a chance to go, my attitude was, thank God that I'm actually here. And I just have a chance to be here, which I'm very thankful that I was able to go through that experience, and I wouldn't change it with that attitude, because I think if I got selected right out of school, it probably wouldn't have been the same for me. So, But you can't control a lot of what happens to you in life. You certainly can't control your attitude. And I think when you stay focused on the goal and you are fully committed to that goal, then you're going to do whatever it takes to prepare, train, and overcome whatever obstacles are put in your way in order to achieve it.
Yeah, I remember we had Bear Hanlon on the podcast, and he described it as you can't go in with any plan B. If you have a plan B that's in the back, like you have to bury that before you go into buds, because it'll, like you said, when it's at 3 a.m. and you're in the cold water, you're going to be like, plan B sounds pretty good. So, yeah, I like the way you described that.
He broke up with his girlfriend, or it was something. He really made dude, I'm out. I'm doing this. Bear, we're talking about. But I think Leif, you're drawing a lot of parallels to work as well, right, in business. And not everybody who listens to this podcast has gone through obviously SEAL training or is intended on becoming a SEAL, right? But I think the way that you're describing it, there's so many parallels, right? It's having this goal, having this discipline, but it's the attitude. And work is and we all know this. Like, work is not always rainbows, right? It's difficult, but I think the way you approach it is super valuable. And dude, I love this subject because I think for people showing up at work, it's great. Yeah.
And Jay, I would just add also being a husband, being a father.
Oh yeah,
right. Which we talk a lot about. Yeah.
I mean, dude, think about yes, with children and just having that attitude, I think is so important as well. And so, Leif, this is episode 1 of the 4 that we're going to be doing for the month of November. Super excited to dive into the next leadership question. For people that want to know more about, the books you've written, or in particular Echelon Front, if you have a business out there and you're interested in getting leadership consulting or leadership support, or you're looking at going out and doing an event for yourself to level you up, definitely check out Echelon Front. But where should they go, Leif? Where's the best place?
Yeah, they can go to echelonfront.com. They can follow us on any social media platform. Echelon Front and is our company, ECHELONFRONT. We teach leadership. We talk about the lesson we learned on the battlefield. You can follow me on social media at Leif Babin. You can follow Jocko at Jocko Willink, or any of our leadership instructors. But if I think a lot of people don't think about leadership as a skill, and it is absolutely a skill that you have to learn and apply, just like any skill that there is out there. And so I think when you realize all of my problems in life are actually leadership problems, and whether it's me as a dad or a husband, whether it's me engaging with members of my community, whether it's me at work trying to get my team to focus on a goal and accomplish that goal, or work with contractors, work with customers, and try to build the best relationships that we can to drive the greatest impact. Every problem that you face in life is a leadership problem. And when you look at leadership as a skill, then you can start to learn that skill and apply leadership to get those problems solved.
I love it. Well, thank you all for checking this one out. Fired up for the next one. Let's go.